So biochemistry, atoms to molecules to cells. That's the name of the chapter. I like this book, Atoms to Molecules to Cells. Now this is an introductory chapter that you read yesterday. It's a college textbook. I think they did a good job summarizing everything. Of course, we're going to go into detail over the next couple of weeks on a lot of the stuff in the chapter. I'm going to explain it, you're going to practice it, you're going to take quiz questions on it, you're going to do a test on it. You need to know this stuff in May. You need to understand these molecules. So, what are atoms, molecules? We start with atoms, for those of you that have not taken any kind of chemistry. Atoms are the smallest component of matter that still retain the properties of that matter. Atoms are made of smaller particles, are they not? Who knows what the atoms are made of? What are atoms made of? That's right, neutrons. That's right. Neutrons, electrons, and protons. I am not going to go over all the chemistry behind all this. Those of you that have had no chemistry, I think there's like 6 of you, you're going to have to catch up some way or another. I will have to come up with some extra activities for you to focus on over the next few weeks to help you catch up. In the nucleus, and this is, almost all the chemistry is kind of based on these kind of fundamental properties. And one of these fundamental properties is that like charges do what? What do like charges do? Do they attract each other? They attract each other, yeah.
They repel each other.
They repel each other. The word is repel. They don't attract. They do the opposite of attract. And you've heard the other saying that opposite charges do what? They attract. So opposite charges attract. You've heard of opposites attract. So the force is moving in that direction where they're pulling towards each other, and the like charges repel each other. I don't know why I put repel. And so that kind of leads to a problem when you think of a nucleus. A nucleus has a bunch of protons and neutrons in it. And the question is, why are the neutrons there? Neutrons, by the way, have no charge, equals 0 charge. And when I say positive and negative, you know it's like your battery, right? You see in the battery you have a positive and negative on your battery, so it's the same thing. Electrons are negative, that's right, 1 negative charge. And the protons equal 1 positive charge. So those of you taking physical science should know that already. Those of you who take chemistry should know this already. So the opposite charges repel. What do you think is happening? This is the nucleus. What is happening in that nucleus? What are the positives doing to the positives? They're repelling each other. They're pushing each other away. So what holds this nucleus together? Now, the neutrons are part of the process, but the force is called strong force. Strong force holds this nucleus together. So you have a nucleus that's being held together, because normally they would repel. Something has to be holding it all together. This thing called strong force is holding it together. But the atom is the nucleus of the atom is this tiny dot. And if that dot were the size of a baseball, then the electrons would be all the way out here. It would be as if the baseball were in the middle of Progressive Field, and then all the way out in the outer stands, all the way up, the highest most stand would be the first electron you'd see. That's how far away, how much space there is between an atom, the parts of an atom. In fact, you are made of atoms, right? Everything you experience is made of atoms. So what this means, the consequence of this means that you are made mostly of what? Made mostly of what? When you look at how much space you take up, what is most of what you, look at the atom, look at this atom. If this atom has, let's say this atom is helium, helium has 2 protons, has 2 neutrons, and has 2 electrons, okay? So there's 2 protons in here, so it's a +2, right? And then there's 2 electrons, and they would have to be as far, why would electrons want to be as far away from each other as they could possibly be? Why? They're both negative. And so because they're both negative, what do? Repel each other, so they're going to be as far away from each other. That's really, if you think about that, if you learn that like charges repel and opposites attract, that explains most of what's going on here. This is a system that can be explained by a simple process. It's electromagnetic force, right? So you're made mostly of space. Most of you is empty space. Look at it. If this is an atom, you're made mostly of atoms, right? This is one of the simpler atoms called helium. You're actually made mostly of this other atom called carbon, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute. When you look at how this atom that's helium only has 2 protons, they're in here, 2 neutrons are in here, all the mass of the atom, most of the mass of the atom's here, most of the charge of the atom on the outside is out here. It's neutral. Why is helium neutral? Look at this and tell me, why is helium neutral? Yeah, Baron? Oh, I shouldn't say your name, sorry.
Because there's 2 positive and 2 negative, and they cancel out each other, and then there's 2.
That's it. 2 positives and 2 negatives. 2 minus 2 is 0. So the net charge on this is 0. That's why most things that you experience around here have no charge. You don't get electrocuted when you touch it, and when you touch the table, right? Because there's no charge. Why? Because they neutralize each other. But these electrons are on the outside of this atom, inside the center, the positive charges. What's holding the electrons to the protons, to that nucleus so far away? Not strong force. Strong force is holding the protons to each other in the nucleus. What's holding this electron to this nucleus? The electrons are what charge? Negative. The protons are? So what is that? So they're opposite, so they're attracting. Electromagnetic force is attracting. Opposite charges attract. So here's this helium atom sitting here, one of the simpler atoms. It's made mostly of space. You are made mostly of space. That chair you're sitting on is made mostly of empty space. We know this, and I can explain to you, we will go through Rutherford's first experiments that kind of told us what the structure of an atom was. But an atom is made mostly of space. You're made mostly of atoms, so you are made mostly of space. It's logic, isn't it? It's logical thinking. An atom is made mostly of space. You are made mostly of atoms. Therefore, you are made mostly of space. So is everything else around you. You're sitting mostly on empty space. Why don't you just flow right through it? You've seen these movies, these Marvel movies, right? You've seen, the Infinity, what's that, the latest one,
Infinity War?
Infinity War. You saw the other one, the one before that, where the guy with the stone in his head.
Vision.
Vision, right? You see, he can go through the floor, right? He can go through walls, right?
He can phase through objects.
Do you ever wonder where they got that idea? They got that idea because matter is made mostly of space, and people thought, well, what if you could vibrate the atoms in such a way as they offset each other? You could phase through, they call it, phase through solid materials. It's fantasy, right? But the point is that they got that fantasy from the reality that matter is made mostly of space. Yeah.
That's also what Shadowcat can do in the X-Men.
Yeah, a lot of these fantasy heroes and villains, they take advantage of science. So they learn something in a science classroom somewhere, and they're like, what if? Right? What if?
Ant-Man,
Yeah.
the way soup works. Oh, also, the atom.
Huh?
DC.
What if they could actually
We can make atoms. We can take these components. What's an atom made of? Protons, neutrons, and electrons. We have these things called super colliders, and we can actually speed up protons and neutrons and smash them together. And we can make atoms. We can make gold. We can take hydrogen and put it together with, we can rip hydrogen off of a molecule called water, rip the hydrogen off, collect it in a beaker, then we can send that hydrogen, positively charged hydrogen atom, through a super collider to a bunch of magnets miles long. Speed them at each other and smash them together and make an atom of gold. Why don't we make all the gold we want? Because it costs more than the gold is worth. It costs a lot of electricity, a lot of resources. Yeah.
They made a machine like that called a particle accelerator in the Flash, and it exploded and had a bunch of negative.
That's right. That's again what did I say about these Marvel comic things. What are they based on? Science. They're based on reality. We do have a particle accelerator. They do exist. We have one in Rochester, New York, an American one. I think they're building a newer one, bigger one here in the United States. And there's this place called CERN. Have you heard of CERN?
No.
In CERN, they have a particle accelerator as well. And it's these particle accelerators are where they're taking these atoms and they're speeding them along mile-long tracks using magnets, making them move really, really fast and then smashing them together. And they release all kinds of energy and they're able to tell what is a proton made of, what's an electron. Because see, protons are made of something. Electrons are made of something. There are these things called pions and muons and just all kinds of weird names, quarks and positively charged quarks and negatively charged quarks. There's positrons as well as electrons. There's antimatter as well as matter. There's something called dark matter that we can't even see or touch or feel or interact with. So all this stuff exists. Science is a lot cooler than the Marvel comics. It's just that people don't know about it because they don't want to spend the time learning about it. Yeah?
Can you replicate an atom in the lab?
We can make atoms, as I just said. We
Like
live.
replicate, like put one in the
Oh, you mean can we teleport an atom? Are you saying can we take an atom here and then send it to New York through space?
Like how cells replicate, I'm saying, can you replicate? I don't know.
You put it like you like take the atom and then do something to it to like make it regenerate itself.
So replicating.
Yeah.
Einstein had this equation. What this equation means, and I'm sure you've seen it.
Ain't that the one that built a bomb?
Yeah, it was the basis of the atomic bomb. Yeah, there's a lot more to it. All right, so I'm simplifying it. I don't understand most of it, so let's get that clear. But there's something called this. What this equation says is yes, you can. And how does it say that? The way it says that is that what this equation says is energy equals matter or mass times the speed of light squared. So we can take energy, light, heat, right? Any kind of form of energy, and we can take it and turn it into what? If we rearrange the equation, we can do this, can't we? Right?
What does MC equal?
C is the speed of light. M is mass, so you have to have mass. Not everything has mass. Light, for instance, does not have mass. And E is equal to energy. So this famous equation that everybody is interested in that you've seen all over t-shirts, etc., actually says that you can make matter. But you need energy. Does that make sense? You need to take energy and turn it into matter. And then you could take matter and you could turn it into energy. So that leads us to another, this equation, this form of the equation led us to what? The atomic bomb.
Little boy.
Little boy, I think it's, what was it, fat, something, what was it? Fat Man and Little Boy, I think it was. Where this equation led to the first atomic bomb. We took matter. What is an atomic bomb? You're taking matter, specifically a radioactive element like plutonium. It's very unstable, and you're pushing it together, and you're forcing what? The protons to get too close. What do the protons do to each other then? They repel, and they repel in such a chain reaction that they start to move really quickly and release a lot of that energy that we just talked about, things like strong force and all the other pieces of energy. I don't understand it, as I said, but all that energy that's in that atom, a lot of it gets released, and that's when you have an atomic bomb. Okay? That's what an atomic bomb is. That's what atomic energy is. We don't have to have a bomb. We can use that, release a controlled atomic reaction. Well, this is called fission. That's breaking up an atom, right? We can control the release of that, and what we call that is nuclear energy. Now, why are we afraid of nuclear energy?
It's dangerous.
It can blow up everything.
Radioactive.
Because it can have a meltdown. It's radioactive. Mainly because of the waste. We don't know what to do with the waste. The waste that's radioactive can be radioactive anywhere from 30 years later to 10,000 years later. What do you do with stuff that's that radioactive for that long?
So, would everybody just start getting like cancer and stuff?
Well, if you go near it, yeah. We have 2 nuclear power plants. One in Perry, that's near Sandusky. You see these things, there's 2 of them on each site. These things called water towers, cooling towers, and they release clean, warm steam. The steam is cooling off the pipes. All this nuclear energy is just a way of heating up water to turn turbines to make electricity. The electricity that you use if you're part of the illuminating company comes from nuclear power. There's 2 nuclear power plants on Lake Erie. Yeah. At least in the Cleveland area. Yeah.
So I was reading this story one time, and basically, what you call it, a nuclear power plant had blew up somewhere.
That's right. There's 2. It's in Chernobyl. I don't know about your story, but there's a place called Chernobyl. You guys can look it up. There's actually a really great documentary. It's still radioactive to this day. It melted the tower, and the core, it had a full meltdown. This is what we call a meltdown.
I got a question about that.
Yeah. Just hope.
The people that had like lived there and stuff like that,
They got cancer. They died immediately. They got cancer. There's still people that are trying to clean it up now. They moved out. Some of those people moved back in because they got nowhere to live, and they're going to get cancer.
So it's like the people that was living there when it happened, and they go somewhere else, do they spread the radioactive stuff?
What a great question. When they left, they were required to remove all their clothes, and then they got scrubbed down so that any radioactive material on the outside got left there. And yes, they could take some radioactive material with them if they weren't careful. But really, the negative impact of the radiation's already happened to them. So over time, the radiation's going to get them. It's likely. The cancer will develop in these people. And indeed, we see that there's a higher rate of cancer among people that were exposed to radiation during the Chernobyl incident. Chernobyl's one of 3 big ones that I can mention. There's another place called Fukushima. And I'm misspelling it, I know, I apologize. But Fukushima is in Japan. It happened more recently. And that released radioactive material into the environment. And in Fukushima, it's gotten to the point where the old people in Japan, a lot of the old people, they're like, look, it's going to take 10, 15 years to get cancer, so I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to help clean this mess up. Because I'll probably be dead before I get cancer, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. That's pretty brave, I think. It's pretty brave thing to do. But this has led to a lot of issues in Japan. Japan is on a fault zone. There's earthquakes, and they built a nuclear power plant on one of those zones, and that's what happened. They had an earthquake. I think it might have been even a tsunami. I can't remember, and that caused the Fukushima incident. There's another incident that you may not have heard about since it was before you were born in the 70s. There's a place called 3 Mile Island. Who saw the movie Wolverine?
Me.
All right. Do you remember when he was battling his brother on top of the tower?
Yeah.
And they battled each other and the tower collapsed?
Yeah.
And that was in not Pittsburgh, but in Pennsylvania. That was on a place called 3 Mile Island. That actually happened. It didn't collapse like that, but they actually had an incident in 3 Mile Island where it almost melted down. So that's where they reference that. In a lot of these Marvel movies, they reference history. So that incident that happened in the movie Wolverine actually did happen on this nuclear power plant on this island. It's an island in a river. It's not an island in a lake in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
What does that say underneath the meltdown?
Fukushima. I can't spell it. Somebody can look it up if they like, but I can't spell it. I don't want to focus on that. So that's nuclear energy, and we will talk more about that later in the year. But the key is that this is called fission. There is another way of getting energy from the atom, and that's by, instead of breaking it up, actually putting them together releases even more energy. Putting two of these things together to form a bigger one actually releases a lot of energy. And that process is called fusion. Fusion is probably the future of energy production for the human race, assuming we live long enough to take advantage of it. We have, as a species, if we're around long enough, we have 3 or 4 fusion power plants being built today based on this idea. Again, I'm going to reference these Marvel movies because you guys have all seen them. Has anyone ever seen the movie, the octopus, the guy with the 8 arms? The Spider-Man one with the 8 arms?
Oh.
Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Where he had that big ball of energy and the big ring swirling around it? That's what they think of as fusion. These are fusion reactors. And these fusion reactors, they actually have a jaded history because it's really hard to do cold fusion. That is, to get fusion to happen and produce more energy than you use to make it. But we're getting there. We're very close to getting it. That means that you could take, theoretically, in the end, assuming you're able to do it, you can take garbage, put garbage in. Now, you need a specific element, but let's just talk about the theory. Take garbage, and you stick it in a fusion reactor, in a box, and what you get out is clean energy. No carbon dioxide, no radioactive material. You just get energy to run your stuff. Wouldn't that be cool? And this is what the sun runs on. Our sun runs on fusion energy. Our sun is taking hydrogen and helium and it's smashing them together to make bigger elements. So fusion and fission, 2 different ways of producing energy using the atom. I see a couple hands that are going. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie Doctor Strange?
Mm-hmm.
Like when they make the portals, that considered fusion too.
Those portals, those transportation portals, that's an idea of creating wormholes, right? So that's the idea of creating connections between space, right? So imagine you have to go from, let's say we were here, and you wanted to go all the way over here. This is US, this is Russia. So let's say you wanted to travel, you have to actually go around the world, don't you? In a plane or on water or on land, you have to travel that distance. Well, what if you could fold space? What if you could take, if space were a sheet of paper, and you could fold it and put them right next to each other so that the dots are literally right next to each other, and then you poke a hole in it, and then you walk through, and then so you go from here to here, right? Walk through the hole, and then unfold it. So that you started here and you end up over here because you walked through the hole while you folded space. That's called creating wormholes or controlled wormholes. It's all theory. No one's done anything like that. All right. But people have thought about maybe that's possible. Yeah.
In Doctor Strange, the ancient one, she explained it along the lines of that they were using the energy throughout the universe, and they were manipulating it to create those. Also, that's similar to the Tesseract book. I'm going off of what I read in the book now, but
Yeah, it's okay. There's a lot of lore. They create the lore in order to explain the universe, which is fine. But the point is that it's based on science, right? All right. So I know there's a lot to talk about. I would love to talk about. I love comic books. I love Marvel movies. So I would talk about it all day, but we don't have time. So, yeah.
So you saying so you saying basically nobody, it's just a theory, nobody has given it. I feel like if they could make HIV, then what else can they do?
Make HIV?
Yeah, like, you know how there is stories like the government made it or something?
There's a lot of stories about that. I'm not sure about that. Could it have been an accident where a virus we will talk about viruses, and we can make viruses, and we can adjust. In fact, we're using HIV and some other viruses, the herpes virus as well, to attack cancer. We've taken those viruses, we've changed the DNA, and we've made them, instead of targeting your normal cells, they target your cancer cells. And we've actually come up with some successful treatments. Not 100% successful yet, but we're on the verge of using viruses to attack cancers and get rid of cancer. So imagine you got a cancer, instead of them operating on you, they inject you with a virus and it's cured. We're not going to get into any more theoretical discussions if these questions are about theory. Go ahead.
oh, this one's not theory. It actually is working right now.
Uh-huh.
And they're taking a cat embryo and they're injecting it with the DNA of a jellyfish that it has that's bioluminescent. And when they injected with it, one of the reactions is that it glows in the dark now. And another reaction is that when they injected it with AIDS, it fought it off completely, and the cat is now immune to any form of AIDS.
Well, that wasn't because of the fluorescence. Bioluminescence is used all the time. In fact, if we have it again this year, there'll be 4 students in 9th grade now that will be actually creating bioluminescent fish, putting human genes into fish. So we do that every summer. We go to Case Western Reserve Medical School, and 4 students and myself, we work in that lab. You were sent the magazine in the fall. If you look at your Jupiter Grade messages, Miss Perez sent it to you. But anyways, that's not the point. Bioluminescence has been used for a fairly long time. We've been able to isolate first the luciferase gene from fireflies, and then the jellyfish glow-in-the-dark genes, we call green fluorescent protein, from jellyfish. We've also isolated many other colors as well. So today we can put those genes in anything. We can adjust those genes, and we can make viruses, and we've actually made a synthetic cell. So we can do all that kind of stuff. But here we're not talking about cells yet. What are we talking about? Atoms. We haven't even gotten to molecules. We've talked about space, and we've talked about energy, and we've talked about matter. I think that's successful. But now let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the next level. So we talked about atoms, and there's 100 plus atoms, right? Types of atoms. What do we call those different types of atoms? What do we call those? Elements. Are called elements. So elements are just types of atoms. So what are the different elements? You have hydrogen, which only has one, and then you have helium, and then you have lithium. And there's all kinds. There's 100 some odd. The first two rows of the periodic table. There's this thing called the periodic table. It looks like this, right? You've seen it. The first two rows we call the first two periods. That's the ones that we're really interested in biology, because that's where most of life, the molecules that make you up, that have to do with life, most of those elements are here in these first two rows. But even if we go into the first 3 or 4 rows, that's about it. These elements down here, all the elements below this, they're really interesting for chemistry and nuclear. The nuclear ones are over here, and these two rows are down here. These are the ones that nuclear scientists are really interested in, because they're very radioactive, right? There are some poisons in these blue rows. Things. The one that you've heard of, I think you've heard a lot about, is lead, right? And lead in the water, lead in the pipes, and that's a big one that's down here. That really should not be in your body. That should not be in life. But when it does involve itself in life, it causes problems. So anyways, there's a bunch of atoms. So you need to know carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Schnapps. It's actually an alcoholic drink, so that's interesting. It's a German drink. Schnapps. Carbon, hydrogen. You have to know this. I've said it twice now. I'll say it a third time. You have to know these. Nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Schnapps. You have to know these. So there's these 6 elements, plus a bunch of others. Lithium is an important one, and you'll see things like, there's a bunch of others that are in those first 2 to 3, 4 rows of the periodic table, okay? That are also intricately involved in this. Iron is another one, right? It's in your blood. Iron's in your blood. It's an important component of red blood cells. But if you talk about biomolecules, these are the main. If they burned you up in an oven and got rid of all the water, obviously H2O, that means hydrogen and oxygen, right? But they got rid of all the water and dehydrated you into a pile of elements. This is what 99% of the elements, would be 99% of that pile would be these. So it's important that you understand that these elements are the ones that make you up. From here, we're going to go and we're going to understand, write this down. I still got a couple minutes, so I know some of you put stuff away. I'm sorry for you. There are 4 big kinds of molecules that you need to know. You need to know what a carbohydrate is. And those have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Notice, do you see anything else in there? No. They have proteins, which have to do with carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur. All right? Then you have nucleic acids, which have, again, we're talking mostly, right? Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and oxygen. And then you have fats. And fats have mostly carbon and hydrogen.
What's those 4 different types of what?
4 different kinds of biomolecules. Molecules of life. All right, so we're going to talk more about this tomorrow. Have a good day. If you were marked absent and you were here, I need to see you. Otherwise, I'm marking you absent in Jupiter grades. Come and see me. I will be available for you this afternoon, but for a short time, I have a meeting right after school, so hurry up. So I just said that the stool you're sitting on, right? Oh, my pencil just died. Right. So the stool you're sitting on has 4 legs and is made of wood, right? A bowl, well, let's not say cereal, let's say a bowl of sugar. So let's assume you have a bowl of sugar where you're going to actually scoop it out to put in your cereal. Hopefully you're not going to eat a bowl of cereal. Of sugar, sorry. Although, really, most cereals are pretty much sugar, right? Wow, we're just not going to listen, huh? Listen. So the sugar and the stool are both, the stool is made of sugar. Sugar put together in a certain way makes a stool. And what happens is that you have these building blocks. The building blocks are these glucose molecules. They look like this. They look like that. That's what sugar looks like. We draw it as a hexagon. All right. So we can link them together in a certain way. You can link them together in a certain way. And this link, they can be very long. You're still talking. I'm trying to explain something. And I'll put it on the quiz just for this class, since you guys need some motivation. So this sugar molecule being connected this way, these things here are called monomers. Together they form a what? Those of you that did your reading yesterday. Polymers. Poly means more than one. So you got monomers put together make polymers. So if you put together these monomers in a certain way, these glucose molecules a certain way, you get something called cellulose. Cellulose is the sugar molecule put together in a certain way that forms these fibers that, oh, that's not good, I'm drawing a DNA molecule. So together in a certain way, they form these fibers that make it very hard for us to digest. We cannot digest it. Very few things in this world can eat cellulose. The few things that can are some bacteria that live in the gut of termites, right? Termites can't digest cellulose, but they have bacteria that can. So they chop up the wood, put it in their gut, and the bacteria in their gut breaks it down for them. So, and there's mold or fungus. Fungus has some, let me put fungi. Oh, let me just put fungus. Some fungus can eat wood, can break down cellulose. But other than that, that's why wood can last hundreds of years, because you need a lot of water. It has to be pretty, if it gets moist, if it gets really wet, the fungus grows really easily, so the fungus can break down the cellulose. If it's dry, fungus can't grow very well, so it can last hundreds of years. So cellulose is hard to break down. But if you put the same monomer, right, the same sugar molecule, that same molecule together in a different way, you get something called starch. Both are made by plants. Cellulose is made by plants, and starch is made by plants. Starch is found in things like potatoes, right? In things like yams. Can you eat starch? Yeah, we can easily digest starch. Even though it's made by plants, we can easily digest them. And when we break them apart, when we take starch, which again is made of these monomers of sugar, connected together in a specific way, like Legos, right? We can break this up. Our enzymes can break that up, and what we end up with is sugar, and now this glucose molecule, now we can eat that, we can use that for energy, but we can't use cellulose for energy because we can't break it up. We can't get the sugar out of that polymer. Does that make sense? I hope so. I'm going to put it on the quiz for you all, so you better. I hope you understand that. All right. So what's going on? What's next? Yeah. Go ahead. Question.
You said no, it's like can't wet dry rot, right?
What they call dry rot is kind of a misnomer. What happens is when wood gets wet, it soaks up the water, and then when it dries, it breaks up the parts that bond it up, and it breaks apart. But then what happens when it gets wet is fungus can grow. If fungus starts growing there, the fungus can break down the polymers. All right, it's 3:16. Please finish reading that reading. You're going to need it for your quiz tomorrow. Good luck. So when we're talking about the difference between starch, cellulose, so let's look at a bunch of different polymers of sugar, all right? Let's look at cellulose. We talked about that one already. And we can talk about starch. Now both of these are plants use these. Plants do these. Now, animals store sugars in different ways. Oh, goodness. And let me see, so plants have cellulose and starch. Starch actually can be broken up further. And let me go ahead. You can actually, there's two forms of starch. There's amylose, right? And there's amylopectin. Now, do I need you to know amylopectin and amylose? No. But I do want you to know starch. So just make sure you know what starch is. Starch is a form of sugar that plants use to do what? Store sugar for eating. So they store it for eating. All right, now cellulose, remember plants make their own food, right? So the plants made that food in the potato or the yam. Cellulose is for what? So it's for structure. Cellulose is for building. When a tree grows tall, it's using cellulose to do that. It's its skeletal structure, right? It's what gives it form. That's why we can use it for chairs and building supplies, because it's for structure. Yeah.
So, is it true, like, you know how cells, like, is one cell, then it breaks to two, and then two breaks to two? Is that true?
Wait, say that again?
So, you know how you have cells, and, like, one cell breaks into two, and then the two breaks into, like, two itself?
You're talking about cells, like,
Yeah. Is that true with...
Hold on. You're talking about cells as in the living creature cells, that the living component of the environment that multiply through mitosis and binary fission, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it true, like, the trees, they go through that more than the human, like, their cells break down quicker than the human does?
Well, I don't want to use those words that you're using. I think those words are misleading. So I don't want to use the word breakdown. I want to hold off on discussing that until we can get I want to hold off on that until we start talking about what cells are, because we haven't even started talking about what cells are. Right now, we're just talking about molecules, right? A bunch of atoms put together. So I'd like to first talk about molecules and understand what they are before we start talking about cells, if that's okay. Next question. Go ahead. I see your hand up. I don't want to say your name. Go ahead.
So, are you saying like if humans had the bacteria in them, we could eat wood?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty cool idea. We could be like termites. We could, we have bacteria in our guts. If we added the bacteria, if somehow we were able to add the bacteria that termites have in their guts, we could sit there and we can graze on food like cattle graze on food. We wouldn't have to worry about getting really rich forms of food. But that's not how our bodies are made, right? So it's a little more complicated than all that. But in general, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah.
Who thought of sugar being in trees? Who did that study?
Who discovered that? Well, it turns out that that story is long and complicated. It turns out that we, as human beings, we build on each other's work. So somebody somewhere discovered that sugar is a component of glucose, is a component of cellulose, and sugar is a component of starch. And we have these tests, these chemical tests, sort of like you've used pH strips before. All right, some people have. So we will be using that. We'll also be using pH meters. And so, hold on a second. So that being said, when we're looking at animals, specifically humans, we store our sugar in a form that's called glycogen. Glycogen. So it looks like this. So these are, I can't find the reference I wanted to find, so I'm going to go ahead and show you these really quick.
Is that supposed to say humans or is it supposed to say animals?
Humans, the animals, and we could even say animals in general. Humans obviously are not the only animals. There are also insects, right? Insects produce something called chitin, chiten, and chitin is what is produced in, is what they use to, what arthropods, including insects and arachnids, right, spiders and scorpions, they have an exoskeleton, right? When you step on an insect, you hear a crunch. That crunch is their outside, their skeleton is on the outside. We have skeletons on the inside. Their skeleton's on the outside. That skeleton, that exoskeleton, is made of chitin. Chitin is a polymer of sugar. They have a polymer of sugar. So that takes care of almost every type of insects is chitin, chiten. Well, it's time to leave. Please watch the video. Anything we haven't covered now is going to have to be for the homework. Those of you that got your books, e-books, please double check it, turn it as an assignment. And if I get that message from you by Monday, you'll get points. All right, have a good one.